Our little office clerk is back, my dad teased when I walked in. His friend, a Navy SEAL, spotted my tattoo Unit 77. His smile vanished. Sir, he said quietly to my father, do you realize who your daughter is? Then he faced me. Admiral Callahan, ma'am. An honor to meet you. You know, there are moments in life that just shatter everything you thought you knew. For me, it was standing in my dress whites, hearing my own father introduce me to a decorated SEAL as his little office clerk. My blood ran cold. He had no idea what he was about to unleash, but in that single dismissive sentence, something snapped inside me, and the truth, the raw, explosive truth about who I really was finally laid bare. Have you ever spent your entire life trying to impress someone, only for them to consistently, effortlessly diminish every single thing you achieve? That was my dad and me. Edward Callahan, Navy Logistics. A good man, I guess, but a product of his time. He pinned his retirement insignia to a shadow box when I was 8, and told me the military was no place for women who couldn't handle combat. 8. Can you believe that? 22 I joined anyway. He signed the paperwork, not a flicker of emotion like it was a requisition form. I think he just assumed I'd wash out, or maybe settle into some safe, unremarkable admin job. Ha! Joke's on him, right? I went to officer candidate school, graduated top of my class. He came to my commissioning ceremony, then left early for a retirement lunch with his old logistics buddies. A lunch. I told myself it didn't matter. It shouldn't have mattered. My career was, well, it was different. Intelligence first. A junior analyst, then joint operations planning. I was good. Really good. I saw connections others missed. Anticipated enemy moves through fragments of communications, satellite imagery. By 26, I was a lieutenant. By 30, a lieutenant commander. I worked with SEALs, Marine Recon, Air Force Special Operations. I learned their language, their rhythms. And I learned they didn't take me seriously until I'd proven myself 3 times over. At 33, I got command of a joint intelligence fusion cell in Bahrain. Desk work in the desert. He called it over the phone, the Padres game blaring in the background. My desk work involved coordinating real-time intelligence for strike packages hitting high-value targets. Nights tracking assets in hostile territory. Preventing a massacre with one of my assessments. But I never corrected him. What was the point? He wouldn't have understood. Or maybe he would have, and that was worse. By 37, I was a Commander 05. I wasn't just analyzing threats anymore. I was shaping operations. Working with special warfare units in classified spaces where my name didn't appear on any public roster. He knew I'd been promoted. I sent him a photo. He texted back. Congrats. Your mother would have been proud. My mother, who died when I was 19, who always told me I could do anything. My father, who always believed I shouldn't. Then, at 40, Unit 77 found me. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was a joint task force for clandestine recovery operations. Hostages, downed pilots, captured intel. We pulled people out of places no one else could reach. I was executive officer, then 18 months later I took command. 41 I was captain 06. The rank that separates career officers from those destined for flag. He didn't come to that ceremony either. Doctor's appointment, he said. Captain Lopez, my second in command, stood in as my guest. Afterward, she asked if I was okay. I said I was. I think I even believed it. The next 2 years were a blur. 3 continents, CIA State Department. Decisions that saved lives. Decisions that cost them. 4 hours of sleep a night, living out of a secure facility that smelled of recycled air and bad coffee. My father called twice. Once to ask if I could get his neighbor's son into the Naval Academy. I couldn't. Once to tell me about a reunion where someone's son just made SEAL Team 06. Now that's a real accomplishment, he said. I told him I had a briefing in 10 minutes. It wasn't a lie. 43 I made Rear Admiral 07. Pentagon ceremony. Deputy Chief of Naval Operations speaking about leadership and sacrifice. My father sent flowers. The card read, "Congratulations. Still can't believe they let you get this far." I kept it for 2 weeks. Then I threw it away. 6 months later, another promotion. Rear Admiral upper half 08. Fewer than 1% of officers ever see it. I was 44. Youngest woman in Naval Special Warfare Command to hold the position. Unit 77 was still mine, though my role shifted to strategic oversight. More briefing rooms, less direct action. Necessary work. Not work my father understood. He still called once a month. Short, surface-level conversations. "How are you doing?" "Fine." He'd talk about his garden, his poker nights. Never asked about my work. I never offered. It was a rhythm, a script. I told myself it was enough. I told myself I didn't need his approval. But every time I hung up, I felt that hollow ache, the same one I felt at 23, standing in my dress whites while he left early for lunch. I sent him money when his pension didn't stretch, arranged for his roof to be fixed, made sure he had everything even though he never asked. It was easier than confronting the truth. I'd spent 2 decades proving myself to a man who would never see me as more than the girl who organized his files. I was an admiral. I commanded one of the most elite units in the U.S. military, and to him I was still just someone who shuffled papers. That was the backdrop. When I came home on leave last spring, I told myself maybe things would be different. I should have known better. He had a way of diminishing things without seeming cruel. Never raised his voice. Never insulted me directly. Just made it clear in 1,000 small ways that what I did wasn't real service. It started when I was a lieutenant. Thanksgiving. He introduced me to his poker group as my daughter, the Navy girl. One of them asked what I did. Before I could answer, Dad said, intelligence analysis. Lots of computers and reports. Not exactly kicking down doors. The men laughed. I smiled, changed the subject. Later, when I tried to tell him about a commendation, he just nodded. That's nice, sweetheart. And went back to the game. By lieutenant commander, the pattern was set. He'd brag about other people's kids. Sons who were Marines, pilots, SEALs. With a reverence he never used for me. At a family dinner, he spent 20 minutes gushing about a friend's son who'd completed B/S training. Now that's a warrior, he said. Someone who's really seen combat. I was sitting right there. Fresh off a deployment where I'd coordinated strikes that dismantled an entire terror cell network. I said nothing. How do you compete with that version of heroism? When I made commander, I called him. He was at a hardware store. Forklifts, intercom announcements. That's great, Alex. Really great. Hey, I gotta grab some lumber before they close. We'll talk later. We didn't talk later. 3 weeks passed. When he called again, he didn't mention the promotion. Asked if I knew anyone who could help his buddy's nephew get a job on base. I gave him a number. He thanked me. Hung up. The breaking point should have come earlier. But I made excuses. Old-fashioned. Didn't understand the modern military. Anomalies. Women in uniform. I rationalized his dismissals as ignorance, not malice. But the truth was simpler, harder. He didn't respect what I did because he didn't see it as real. Captain. 2 months advance notice. A call to confirm. I'll be there, he said. Morning of, he called. Doctor's appointment. Been on the books for months. Can't reschedule. I didn't push. It's fine. Captain Lopez stood with me. After, she asked if I wanted a drink. No. I went back to my quarters. Stared at the wall for an hour. He called 2 days later. How'd it go? I gave him a summary. Well, you've always been good at the administrative side of things, he said. That's a valuable skill. Something cracked inside me. A small piece of hope I didn't know I was still holding. I thanked him, ended the call. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying over him years ago. The comments continued. Every visit. Every call. A subtle jab disguised as humor. Our little clerk's probably organizing supply chains. Or, Alex does all the behind-the-scenes stuff. Real important work, even if it's not glamorous. Said with affection, like he was proud I knew my place. I'd smile. Nod. What else could I do? Tell him I'd been in firefights? Made calls that put lives on the line? Earned my rank through decisions most people couldn't fathom? He wouldn't have believed me. Or worse, he would have, and it still wouldn't have mattered. By Rear Admiral lower half, I'd stopped expecting anything. The promotion was significant. Flag officer. A level of authority most officers never reach. He sent flowers. The card felt like a backhanded compliment. I didn't keep it. Didn't need another reminder that his pride was conditional. His respect reserved for men who fit his narrow definition of service. 6 months later, Rear Admiral upper half. I didn't tell him until a week after the ceremony. Another promotion. He sounded surprised. They're really moving you up fast. It wasn't fast. It was 22 years of work. Well, you always were good at climbing the ladder. Your mother had that same ambition. Not a compliment. A dismissal. I let it go. I always let it go. The last conversation before I came home for that fateful leave was brief. I told him I'd be visiting. Great, Alex. I'm having a few of the guys over for a barbecue. You should come. I asked who. Old Navy buddies. And Jacob Rains, a SEAL commander he'd stayed in touch with. Jake's a hell of an operator, my father said. You'll like him. Real warfighter. I said I'd be there. I hung up. Stared at my phone. Why did I keep doing this to myself? I drove 6 hours to his house, Interstate 95, Virginia, cutting west toward the Blue Ridge foothills. The house was small, single-story, the yard needed mowing. I arrived just after 1300 hours. The driveway was already packed with trucks and a Jeep with veteran plates. I parked on the street, sat in my car gathering myself. I was in dress whites. Came straight from a ceremony in D.C. No time to change. It's just a barbecue, I told myself. My father was in the backyard. Grill beer talking to 3 men. One younger, late 30s, built like he still ran 10 miles before breakfast. That had to be Rains. Dad saw me first. Grinned. Raised his beer. Our little office clerk is home, he called out. Loud enough for everyone. The men turned. A couple chuckled. I forced a smile. Kept walking. He met me halfway, pulled me into a one-armed hug. Look at you all dressed up. Come from a meeting or something. I told him about the change of command ceremony in D.C. He nodded absently, already turning back to his friends. Guys, this is my daughter Alex. She's in the Navy. Does all the intel paperwork and coordination. Real brain work. One older man shook my hand. Logistics, he asked. Intelligence and special operations, I said. He nodded like he didn't know the difference. Rain stepped forward. Sharp eyes. Calm intensity. The kind you see in operators who've spent years in bad places. He extended his hand. Commander Rains. Likewise, I said. My father clapped him on the shoulder. Jake here just got back from a rotation overseas. Can't talk about it, but let's just say he's been keeping the bad guys on their toes. Rains smiled politely. Said nothing. I liked him immediately. We moved toward the grill. My father handed me a beer. Conversation shifted to sports, weather, safe topics. I stood at the edge, half listening, trying to figure out how long I needed to stay before I could make an excuse to leave. That's when Rains saw the tattoo. It was on my left forearm, just below the sleeve of my dress whites. A trident with the number 77 beneath it. Small. Precise. I'd gotten it years ago when Unit 77 was still new. Stupid in hindsight. Officers aren't supposed to get unit tattoos. But I was younger. It felt important. I kept it covered ever since. But dress whites have short sleeves. No hiding it. Rains was mid-sentence when his eyes landed on it. He stopped talking. His expression shifted. Recognition. Disbelief maybe. He stared at my arm for a long moment, then up at my face. Back at the tattoo. Unit 77, he said quietly. Not a question. I nodded. That's right. The yard went silent. My father looked between us, confused. What's Unit 77? Rains didn't answer. He was still staring at me. I could see the gears turning. He was putting pieces together. My rank, my age, the tattoo, the DC ceremony. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, almost hesitant. Sir, he said, turning to my father. Do you know who your daughter is? My father blinked. What do you mean? She's Alex. She works in intelligence. Rains shook his head slowly. He turned back to me. I saw the exact moment he made the connection. His posture shifted. He straightened. His hands dropped to his sides. When he spoke again, it was with the formal tone of someone addressing a superior officer. Admiral Callahan, he said. Ma'am, it's an honor. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. The other men stared, processing. One of them, an older guy in a faded Marine Corps t-shirt, looked at me, then my father, then Rains. Admiral, he said. She's an admiral? Rains nodded. Rear Admiral, upper half. Oh, and she commands Unit 77. Joint Task Force. Clandestine recovery. Hostage rescue. Asset extraction. High-risk intel missions. If you've heard about it, you shouldn't have. He looked at me again. Something close to awe in his expression. Ma'am, I worked with your people in Syria 2 years ago. You pulled out 6 of ours when everyone else said it was impossible. I didn't know you were. He stopped himself. Shook his head. I'm sorry. I had no idea. I didn't know what to say. I looked at my father. Pale. Beer forgotten in his hand. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're an admiral, he finally managed. I nodded. Since last year. He blinked. But you said you worked in intelligence. I do, I said. I also command a special operations task force. Have for the last 3 years. He stared at me like I was speaking a language he didn't understand. Rain stepped back, giving us space. The other men had gone quiet. Uncomfortable witnesses. My father set his beer down. His hands were shaking. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just looked at him. This man who'd spent 2 decades dismissing everything I'd done and said, I tried. The barbecue didn't recover. Rains and the other men made awkward excuses. Within the hour, they were gone. Shook my hand with a deference I wasn't used to outside of official settings. Stiff thank yous for my service. Rains lingered. He pulled me aside near my car. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I cut him off. You didn't do anything wrong, Commander. If anything, I should thank you. He nodded but still looked uncomfortable. Your father's a good man, he said. He talks about you all the time. He's proud of you. I didn't correct him. There was no point. When everyone was gone, I went inside. My father was at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. The house was quiet. I stood in the doorway. He looked up. And for the first time in my life, I saw something I didn't recognize in his expression. Not anger, not dismissal. Shame. I didn't know, he said quietly. I pulled out a chair, sat across from him. You didn't ask. He flinched. Small movement. Barely perceptible. I thought. He stopped. Shook his head. I thought you were doing admin work. Coordination. He gestured vaguely. Couldn't finish. A flag officer? I offered. A commander of a special operations unit. Someone who spent the last 20 years doing exactly what you said women couldn't do. He looked away. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The words came out sharper than I intended. I didn't take them back. Every time I tried to tell you what I did, you changed the subject. Every time I came home, you introduced me as your clerk. You dismissed every promotion, every deployment, every piece of my career like it didn't matter. So no, Dad, you didn't say it. But you made it very clear. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. I didn't mean to. He stopped again. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I didn't make a big deal out of it, you wouldn't get hurt when things didn't work out. I stared at him. Things did work out. I'm an admiral. I've done things most people will never even hear about. And you weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. He didn't argue. Just sat there. This man who'd spent his whole life believing he understood how the world worked. Realizing maybe he didn't. I thought about leaving. Walking out. Never coming back. But there was something in his face. A small crack in the armor he'd worn for so long. It made me stay. Why didn't you come to my ceremonies? I asked. Why didn't you ever ask what I actually did? He rubbed his face. I don't know, he said. I guess. I was scared. Of what? Of realizing I was wrong about you. The admission hung in the air. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to absolve him, to say it was okay. But it wasn't okay. 20 years of dismissal couldn't be erased with one moment of honesty. I need to go, I said, standing. He looked up, panicked. Alex, wait. I'm not leaving forever, I said. I just need some air. I walked out to the porch, sat on the steps. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. I thought about every time he'd introduced me as his clerk. Every time he'd bragged about someone else's son. Every time he'd made me feel like I was less than. And I thought about Rains, the way his expression had shifted. The way he'd straightened and called me ma'am. It was the first time my father had ever seen someone treat me with the respect I'd earned. He came out 10 minutes later. Sat beside me. We didn't speak for a while. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. I didn't look at him. For what specifically? For not seeing you, he said. For not understanding what you were doing. For making you feel like it didn't matter. I nodded slowly. Okay. That's it, he asked. Just, okay. I turned to face him. What do you want me to say? That it's fine. That I forgive you? I don't know if I do yet. You spent 2 decades treating me like I was playing pretend. Do you have any idea what that felt like? He shook his head. No, I don't. Then give me time, I said. Give me time to figure out if I can get past this. He nodded. We sat in silence. Then he said, Unit 77. That's really what you command. Yes. And you've been doing this for how long? 3 years in command. But I've been working in special operations for over a decade. He let out a long breath. Jesus, Alex. I had no idea. I know, I said. And that was the problem. I didn't see my father for 3 months after that. We spoke twice, short, stilted conversations. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He asked if I was safe. I told him as much as I could, which wasn't much. He didn't press. It was progress, I suppose, but it didn't feel like enough. Word spread quickly through his town's veteran community. Within a week, everyone knew. The man who'd spent years dismissing his daughter's career suddenly found himself fielding questions about what it was like to raise a flag officer. He handled it poorly at first. Tried to deflect, to downplay. But his friends weren't stupid. They could read between the lines. One of them, a retired Marine colonel, cornered him at a VFW meeting. "Ed," he said, "you've been telling us for years your daughter pushes papers. Meanwhile, she's out there running missions most of us couldn't even dream of. What the hell were you thinking?" My father didn't have an answer. He called me that night. For the first time in my life he sounded small. "They all know," he said. "Everyone's talking about it." I was in my office, reviewing mission briefs for an operation in the Horn of Africa. I put down my pen, leaned back, and I feel like an idiot. "You should," I said. It wasn't kind, but it was true. He was quiet. Then, I started reading about Unit 77. Not much out there, but I found some articles. Old news reports about missions not attributed to anyone. "Was that you?" "Some of it," I said. "Most of it you'll never read about." "Why not?" "Because that's how it works, Dad. We don't exist on paper. We do the jobs no one else can do, and then we disappear. That's the point." He let out a long breath. I had no idea. I thought. He stopped. I don't know what I thought. I felt something shift in me. A small loosening of the anger. He was trying. It was clumsy. Inadequate. But he was trying. "Dad," I said. "I need you to understand something. I didn't do this for recognition. I didn't do it to prove you wrong. I did it because it mattered. Because people's lives depended on someone making hard calls, and I was willing to make them. But it would have been nice to know that you saw that. That you respected it." "I do now," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I do." "Okay," I said. "That's a start." We talked for another 20 minutes. He asked questions. Careful. Tentative. About my work. My rank. What it meant to command a unit like 77. I answered what I could. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was the first real conversation we'd had in years. Over the next few months something changed. He started calling more often. The calls felt different. He wasn't dismissing what I did. He asked about my day, my deployments, the people I worked with. He still didn't understand most of it, but he was trying. That mattered. He started going to therapy. Didn't tell me at first. I found out through a mutual friend. When I asked him, he was embarrassed. "Figured I should talk to someone," he said. "About what?" "About why I treated you the way I did. About why I couldn't see what was right in front of me." I didn't know what to say. "That's good, Dad. I'm glad." I saw the change in other ways. He stopped bragging about other people's kids. Stopped introducing me as his clerk. When someone asked what I did, he'd say, "She's a rear admiral in the Navy, commands a special operations unit. Can't tell you much more than that, but I'm proud of her." The first time I heard him say that, I almost cried. But pride wasn't the same as understanding. Respect wasn't the same as repair. There were still moments I'd catch him looking at me like he didn't recognize me. Like the daughter he thought he knew had been replaced. Maybe that was true. Maybe she never existed. I threw myself into work. Easier than dealing with the mess at home. Operations to plan, people to protect, missions to execute. Unit 77 ran 3 major operations that fall. All successful. We pulled a kidnapped journalist out of Yemen. Extracted a compromised asset from Eastern Europe. Recovered sensitive materials from a downed drone. Each one precision, coordination, a level of risk management that kept me awake at night. But they worked. My people came home. That was all that mattered. Captain Lopez noticed. "You okay, ma'am? You seem distracted." I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. "If you need to talk." "I don't," I said. Then softer. "But thank you." She nodded. Went back to reports. But I could feel her watching me. That night, alone in my quarters, I thought about my father. The shame in his eyes. The apology he didn't know how to give. The years I'd spent trying to earn his respect. The ways I'd bent myself into shapes I thought he'd approve of. And the fact that I'd made it to Admiral without him ever understanding what that meant. Maybe he understood now. Maybe he didn't. Either way, I'd done it. And that had to be enough. The invitation came in late autumn. A formal request from Naval Special Warfare Command. I was handing over Unit 77 to my successor, Captain Elena Park, a brilliant officer I'd mentored. It was time. 3 years in command. The toll was showing. I needed a new challenge. I'd been offered a position as Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare. Significant move. A desk at the Pentagon. A voice in strategic decisions that would shape the Navy for the next decade. I accepted. I called my father. Told him about the ceremony in San Diego. Didn't expect him to come. Long trip. His health was declining. But when I asked, he didn't hesitate. I'll be there, he said. I wouldn't miss it. I told him he didn't have to. I know, he said. But I want to. The ceremony was early December. A crisp Saturday morning at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Clear sky. Ocean visible. A perfect California day. I arrived early. Service dress blues. Crisp. Ribbons aligned. Beaches. From this side it felt different. Letting go. My father arrived an hour early. I saw him from across the parade ground, walking slowly with a cane I didn't know he needed. He was wearing his old service dress uniform, kept in a garment bag for 15 years. Fit him differently now. Looser. Tighter. He looked older. Smaller. But he stood straight. When he reached me, he saluted. I returned it. Pulled him into a hug. You didn't have to wear the uniform, I said. I wanted to, he replied. Felt right. We didn't have much time to talk. I introduced him to some of my staff. Captain Lopez. Lieutenant Park. He shook their hands with a formality I wasn't used to seeing from him. When Lopez said, "Your daughter's the best commander I've ever served under," he nodded. I'm starting to understand that. The ceremony itself was precise, efficient. Beaches. Mine about service, the mission, the extraordinary people I'd led. I didn't talk about my father. But when I looked out and saw him standing in the front row, tears streaming down his face, something broke open inside me. After handshakes, photos, small talk, my father and I found a quiet spot near the waterfront. Sat on a bench. Sound of seagulls, distant boat engines. He was first to speak. I should have known, Lex. Lex. My mother called me Lex. He'd stopped after she died. Known what? I asked. Who you were. What you were capable of. I should have seen it. I looked out at the water. Maybe. But you didn't. I was scared, he said. Of you. Of losing you. Of you going somewhere I couldn't follow. I turned to face him. I've been going places you couldn't follow for 20 years, Dad. That's the job. He nodded. I know. And I made it worse by pretending I didn't see it. By acting like what you did didn't matter. I thought if I didn't take it seriously it wouldn't be real. And if it wasn't real you'd be safe. But I wasn't safe, I said. I was in danger. My entire career. And you never acknowledged it because you couldn't handle it. You're right, he said. And I'm sorry. We sat in silence. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small box, handed it to me without a word. Inside his Navy ring. The one he'd worn for 30 years. What's this? I asked. It's yours, he said. I should have given it to you a long time ago. Dad, I can't. Yes, you can, he interrupted. You earned it. You earned it more than I ever did. I held the ring. Its weight. Scratched. Worn. Gold dulled. Smelled faintly of metal and salt air. I slipped it onto my finger. Too big. But I didn't care. Thank you, I said. He nodded. And for a moment I thought we might actually be okay. Not healed. Not whole. But something close to understanding. I just never thought they'd let someone like us lead a unit like that, he said quietly. I pulled the ring off. Handed it back to him. He looked confused. What? They didn't let me, Dad, I said. I earned it. There's a difference. His face fell. He stared at the ring in his palm, then back at me. I didn't mean. I know what you meant, I said. And that's the problem. You still don't get it. This wasn't about luck. Or being let in. This was about proving myself every single day for 20 years. Being twice as good to get half the credit. Making decisions that would have broken most people. Doing it without recognition because that's what the job required. He looked down. I'm sorry, Alex. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. I needed a father who believed in me, I said. But I'll settle for one who's trying to understand. Silence again. He closed his hand around the ring. I'm trying. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am. I know, I said. We sat there until the sun began to set, painting the bay in orange and pink. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Crack in the wall. Possibility. When we finally stood, he offered me his arm. I took it. We walked toward the parking lot together. An old man in an outdated uniform, and his daughter, the Admiral. Neither of us quite sure what came next, but willing to find out. The months that followed were a study in reconstruction. I dove into my new role at the Pentagon: bureaucratic warfare, joint operations, information warfare strategy. It was different, less immediate, more abstract, but no less important. The decisions I made would ripple through the Navy. My father and I spoke every week. Still awkward sometimes, still strained, but real. He asked questions about my work. I answered what I could. He told me about his therapy sessions. "The therapist says I have trouble accepting things I can't control," he said once. "She says I tried to make you smaller so I wouldn't have to worry about you." "That sounds about right," I said. He laughed. A short, bitter sound. "Yeah, it does." He started reading military history, books about leadership, women in combat, the evolution of special operations. He'd call me with questions. "It says here Admiral Grace Hopper invented computer programming languages," he said once. "Did you know that?" I told him I did. "She was a rear admiral," he continued. "Just like you." "I never knew that." "There have been a lot of women doing remarkable things in the military," I said. "We've just been doing it quietly. Too quietly." "Someone should have told me," he said. I wanted to say I tried, but I let it go. He was learning. That had to be enough. In the spring, he came to visit me in Virginia. First time he'd ever come to me. I picked him up from the airport. We drove through Arlington past the Pentagon. He stared out the window like a tourist. "You work here," he said, more to himself than to me. "You actually work here?" "I do," I said. "What's it like?" I thought about it. Overwhelming. Frustrating. Rewarding. All of it. I showed him my office. A small space with a window overlooking the river. Walls lined with commendations, photos. He stood in the doorway, just looking. "This is real," he said quietly. "This is actually real." "It always was," I said. He nodded. "I know. I'm starting to understand that." We had dinner that night at a quiet restaurant. Over wine and pasta, he told me about his life, the things he regretted, the ways he wished he'd been different. "I was a good logistics officer," he said, "but I was a mediocre father. I see that now." "You weren't mediocre," I said. "You were absent. There's a difference." He flinched. Didn't argue. "You're right. I was. And I'm sorry." I took a sip of wine. "I used to think that if I just did enough, achieved enough, you'd finally see me. But the problem wasn't what I did. The problem was that you'd already decided who I was. And nothing I accomplished could change that." "Until rains," he said. I nodded. "Until rains. I hate that it took someone else telling me for me to believe it," he said. "I hate that I couldn't see it on my own." "So do I said. "But here we are." We finished dinner in relative silence. Afterward, we walked along the Potomac. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but insisted on walking. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. All the years of dismissal. All the times he'd made me feel invisible. The girl desperate for his approval. The woman who learned to live without it. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe. But forgiveness isn't going to erase what happened. It's not going to give me back the years I spent trying to be enough for you." "I know," he said. "I just needed to hear you say it." We walked in silence. Then he said, "For what it's worth, you were always enough. I was just too stupid to see it." It wasn't absolution, but it was honest. And honesty, I was learning, was its own form of repair. His health declined over the next year. Small things at first. Shortness of breath. Fatigue. By summer, congestive heart failure. 2 years, maybe 3 if he was lucky. I flew home as often as I could, juggling Pentagon briefings with hospital visits. Secure phone calls with bedside conversations. He hated that I was there. Hated that I was seeing him weak. "You've got more important things to do than babysit an old man," he'd say. I'd tell him there was nothing more important. He'd shake his head, but he'd also talk more openly than ever. About my mother. His own father. The ways generational trauma gets passed down like heirlooms no one wants but everyone keeps. "My dad never told me he was proud of me either," he said once. "I swore I'd be different with my kids. And then I just repeated the same mistakes." "You didn't have to," I said. "I know. But it's easier to repeat what you know than to build something new." He looked at me, eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "You built something new. You broke the pattern." "I had to," I said. "There wasn't another option." He smiled weakly. "You always were stubborn. You got that from your mother." In the fall, I brought Lieutenant Park to meet him. She'd taken command of Unit 77 with the same precision and dedication I'd hoped for. I wanted him to see what came next. He sat in his living room, oxygen cannula in his nose. Listened as Park told him about a recent operation. Classified details stripped away, but the shape of it clear. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You're doing good work," he said. "Thank you, sir," Park replied. He turned to me. "You trained her." "I mentored her. She did the work herself." He looked between us. I saw something like wonder. "This is your legacy," he said. "Not just the missions. The people." I hadn't thought of it that way. But he was right. The missions would be forgotten. But the people, the officers I'd trained, the leaders I'd shaped, they'd carry forward. They were the legacy. By December he was in hospice. I took emergency leave. Moved into his house. Sleeping on the couch. Managing his care. Captain Lopez handled my responsibilities at the Pentagon. "Take the time you need, ma'am. We've got this." My father drifted. Sometimes he'd know where he was, who I was. Other times he'd call me by my mother's name, or ask when he had to report for duty. I'd hold his hand, tell him he was home, safe, everything taken care of. 3 days before he died, a moment of clarity. He called me over. His voice barely a whisper. "Lex. I'm here, Dad. I need to tell you something." "Okay." I was wrong about everything. About you. About what mattered. About what makes someone a warrior. You were braver than any of us. You walked into rooms where no one wanted you and made them give you a seat at the table. That's courage. That's real strength. Tears burned in my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. I should have said it 20 years ago," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't." "I know," I said. "I forgive you." He closed his eyes. I thought he drifted off. But then he squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be so proud of you. I am too. I hope you know that." "I do know," I said. He died 2 days later. Tuesday morning. Just after dawn. I was sitting beside him reading a book when his breathing changed. I set the book down. Took his hand. Stayed there until the end. It was quiet. Peaceful. Nothing like the way he lived. And maybe that was a mercy. We buried him with full military honors at Arlington. Took some work. He hadn't served long enough to automatically qualify. His rank wasn't high enough. But I made some calls. Pulled some strings. Got him in. He would have hated that I used my position. He also would have been secretly pleased. The funeral was small. A handful of old Navy friends. Neighbors. Distant relatives. Captain Lopez came. Lieutenant Park. Commander Rains, who'd stayed in touch. The Navy provided an honor guard. Young sailors. Folded the flag with mechanical precision. Handed it to me with rehearsed words of gratitude. I held the flag. Its weight. Thinking about what it represented. Not just his service but mine. Not just his legacy but the one I was still building. When the rifle salute fired, I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse sounds in worse places. After people approached. Offered condolences. He was a good man, a dedicated officer, a loyal friend. They told me he'd talked about me constantly in his final year. So proud. I thanked them. Smiled. Played the part of the grieving daughter. And I was grieving. Not just for the man who died. For the relationship we never had. The years we'd wasted. The understanding that came too late. Rains was the last. Stood at attention. "Admiral, I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Commander." He hesitated. "If it helps," he said. He changed. After that day at the barbecue, he really changed. He spent the last year trying to understand who you were. "That's worth something." "It is," I said. "But it doesn't erase the 20 years before it." "No," Rains agreed. "But it counts for something." I nodded. He saluted. I returned it. And then he walked away, leaving me alone with the flag and the silence. I returned to work a week after the funeral. Backlog of decisions. Briefings. Meetings. I dove in. Channeled grief into productivity. The way I always had. Captain Lopez noticed, of course. "Ma'am, if you need more time." "I don't," I said. "Work is what I need right now." She didn't push. But she watched me carefully. 2 weeks after the funeral, a package arrived. No return address. Just my name and rank in my father's handwriting. Inside, his Navy ring. The one he tried to give me. Beneath it, a note on yellowed paper. Ink slightly smudged. "Lex, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't give this to you in person, but you gave it back last time and I understood why. I didn't earn the right to pass it to you, but I want you to have it anyway. Not because of what I did, but because of what you've done. You didn't just meet the standard. You became the standard. I wish I'd told you that more. I wish I'd seen it sooner, but I see it now. You're not my little clerk. You never were. You're Admiral Alexandra Callahan, and you're everything I should have been. Carry this if you want. Leave it in a drawer if you don't. Either way, know that I finally understood who you were. And I was in awe. Dad. I read the note 3 times. Then I slipped the ring onto my finger. Still too big. But I didn't care. I wore it for the rest of the day. Its weight. Its history. The complicated legacy it represented. When Captain Lopez noticed, she didn't say anything. Just nodded. A small gesture of understanding. That night, alone in my quarters, I thought about my father. The man he'd been. The man he'd tried to become. The ways we'd hurt each other. And the small grace of his final year. He'd spent 2 decades dismissing me, and 1 year trying to make up for it. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. I thought about my mother too. The woman who believed in me from the beginning. I wished she'd lived to see what I'd become. But maybe she had, in some way I couldn't measure. And I thought about the younger officers I'd mentored. Park. The dozens of others. Women who faced the same quiet dismissals. The same subtle undermining. The same impossible standards. I tried to give them what I never had. Someone who saw them. Who believed in them. Who cleared the path so they didn't have to fight every battle I'd fought. That was the real work. Not the operations. The missions. The classified briefings. The real work was making sure the next generation didn't have to prove themselves the way I had. The real work was changing the culture. One conversation, one decision, one promotion at a time. I pulled out my phone. Called Lieutenant Park. She answered on the second ring. Admiral, is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. I just wanted to check in. How's command treating you? It's good, ma'am. Challenging but good. That's how it should be, I said. Elena, I need you to remember something. Yes, ma'am. You belong there. You earned that command through years of hard work and dedication. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Not your peers. Not your superiors. Not anyone. A pause. Then quietly. Did someone make you doubt it, ma'am? For a long time, I said. Too long. Don't make my mistake. I won't, she said. I promise. Good. Carry on, Lieutenant. Aye, ma'am. I hung up. Sat in the silence of my quarters. Feeling something like peace settle over me. My father had introduced me wrong once. Called me his little clerk. Dismissed my achievements. Refused to see who I'd become. But in the end he'd seen it. In the end he'd known. And maybe that was enough. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. But acknowledgement. The recognition that I'd done something worthy. Something that mattered. I'd served quietly for 20 years. And then someone had finally noticed. Not because I demanded it, but because the truth had a way of revealing itself. I looked down at his ring. Still too big on my finger. And I thought about his note. You're everything I should have been, he'd written. But he was wrong about that. I wasn't what he should have been. I was what I'd chosen to become. And that distinction mattered. 5 years later, I stood in the same Pentagon office. Now a 3-star admiral. Deputy Chief of Naval Operations. The responsibilities had grown. Decisions weightier. But the core work remained. Protecting people, enabling missions, shaping the future of naval warfare. I was 50 now. More gray in my hair. More lines around my eyes. But I was still here. Still serving. Still fighting. Commander Park, as she was now, commanded her own battle group. She'd exceeded every expectation. We spoke regularly. Every conversation reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Not for recognition. Not for glory. But for the opportunity to build something that would outlast me. My father's ring sat in a small wooden box on my desk, next to his final note. I didn't wear it anymore. Too loose. Too impractical. But I kept it close. Some days I'd open the box. Read the note. Remind myself of how far we'd both come. Other days I'd leave it closed. Focused on the present. The wound he'd left hadn't fully healed. I'm not sure it ever would. But it had scarred over, leaving behind a harder, wiser version of myself. I'd learned that respect couldn't be demanded, only revealed. That some apologies came through changed behavior, not just words. That legacy wasn't about the recognition you received, but about the people you lifted up. On quiet evenings when the Pentagon emptied out, I'd think about that barbecue. My father's joke. Our little office clerk is home. Commander Rain's response. The look on my father's face when he realized he'd been wrong. It should have felt like vindication. Instead it felt like grief. But grief wasn't the end of the story. The end was what came after. The slow rebuilding. The tentative reconciliation. The grace of his final year. He'd spent 2 decades getting it wrong and 1 year trying to make it right. It hadn't erased the hurt, but it had transformed it into something bearable. Something I could carry. I kept his Navy ring as a reminder. Not of him, but of the choice I'd made. The choice to serve anyway. To excel anyway. To build a career worth having even when no one was watching. I'd done it for myself. Not for him. But in the end he'd seen it. And that had mattered more than I'd expected. Now, standing at my office window overlooking the Potomac, I thought about what I'd tell my younger self if I could. I'd tell her that the validation would come eventually, but not in the way she expected. I'd tell her she'd spend years proving herself to someone who couldn't see her, and that it would hurt, but it wouldn't break her. I'd tell her she'd make admiral, command elite units, shape the future of naval warfare. And I'd tell her that none of it would mean as much as the moment when her father finally called her by her rank. He'd introduced me wrong once, but in the end he knew exactly who I was. And maybe after everything that was enough. 1 year later I was sitting in a congressional hearing room, testifying about the future of special operations integration. Questions pointed, atmosphere tense. And somewhere in the back of my mind I kept thinking my father would have been terrified by this. Not because of the stakes, he'd understood pressure, but because he never would have imagined his daughter in this chair, speaking with authority about national security strategy, to people who held the nation's purse strings. The hearing wrapped at 1600, 30 minutes before my next meeting. I ducked into a quiet corridor, checked my phone. A message from Commander Park. Ma'am, something you should see. Below it, a link to a military blog post. The Invisible Admirals, Women Who Shaped Modern Naval Warfare. Clicked it. My name was there, alongside a dozen others. The article was well researched, citing recently declassified operations, missions I'd almost forgotten. It mentioned Unit 77 by name. Apparently, some of our work had finally been cleared for public discussion. The comments section was predictably mixed. Half supportive. The other half questioned whether women belonged in combat leadership at all. I closed the browser. Some battles never end. They just change shape. That evening I drove out to Arlington. Hadn't been back since the funeral. Not sure why I was going now. Maybe the hearing had drained me. Maybe seeing my name in print, linked to special operations classified missions, made me think about how long it had taken for anyone to notice. Maybe I was tired of carrying the weight alone. The cemetery was nearly empty. I found my father's grave easily. Section 60, row C. A simple white headstone. Name, rank, dates. Someone had left a small American flag beside it. Probably one of his old Navy buddies. I stood there for a long time, hands in my coat pockets, watching the sun set over the rows of white markers. I testified before Congress today, I said finally, about special operations reform. They asked hard questions. I gave harder answers. I paused. You would have been proud. Or terrified. Maybe both. The wind picked up. Cold. Sharp. I pulled my coat tighter. I'm wearing 3 stars now. They promoted me last month. Vice Admiral. I'm one of the youngest women to ever hold the rank. I looked down at the headstone. I thought about calling you. Then I remembered you're not there to answer anymore. A groundskeeper drove past. Nodded respectfully. I waited until he was out of sight. I still get angry sometimes. When I think about all those years you didn't see me. When I remember introducing myself at functions and having men assume I was someone's wife, not someone's commander. When I think about how hard I had to work just to be taken half as seriously as my male peers. I crouched down, brushed some leaves off the headstone. But I also remember that last year. The way you tried. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I stood back up. Commander Raines called me last week. He's retiring. Moving to Colorado. He told me that barbecue changed his life. Made him look at his own daughter differently. Made him realize he'd been making the same mistakes. He thanked me. I laughed. Short. Bitter. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson that day. I was just trying to survive a family dinner. A jet passed overhead. Likely heading to Reagan National. I tracked it across the sky until it disappeared. I'm mentoring 6 junior officers right now. All women. All brilliant. All fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight. I'm trying to make it easier for them. Trying to clear the path so they don't have to prove themselves the way I did. I paused. I think that's what you were trying to tell me at the end. That the work isn't just the missions. It's the people who come after. The sun was almost gone. The cemetery sinking into twilight. I needed to leave. Needed to get back to my apartment. Prepare for tomorrow's briefings. But I stayed a moment longer. I forgave you, I said quietly. I'm not sure when it happened exactly. Maybe it was when I read your note. Maybe it was later, when I realized I was carrying your ring in my pocket like a talisman. Maybe it's happening right now, standing here, telling you about my life like you can still hear me. I took a breath. You hurt me for a long time, but you also raised me to be resilient, to serve quietly, to do the work without needing applause. You just never realized I'd take those lessons and build something you couldn't imagine. I reached out, touched the cold stone. I miss you. Not the version of you that dismissed me, the version from that last year, the one who finally saw me. I wish we'd had more time with that version. I pulled my hand back. But we didn't. So I'm taking what you gave me, the good and the bad, and I'm using it to build something better for the women who come after me. For the daughters who deserve fathers who see them from the start. I straightened my coat, squared my shoulders. I have to go. I have a breakfast meeting with the Chief of Naval Operations tomorrow. We're discussing the next generation of information warfare strategy. Big decisions. Lives in the balance. The kind of work you never thought I'd do. I smiled. But I'm doing it. And I'm doing it well. I started to walk away. Then stopped. Looked back. You introduced me wrong once, Dad. But I introduced myself correctly every day after. And that made all the difference. I saluted. Sharp. Precise. Then I turned and walked back to my car, carrying his memory, and my own hard-won certainty that I'd earned every single step of the journey. The cemetery gates were closing as I drove out. In my rearview mirror, the headstones disappeared into darkness. Row after row of service members who'd given everything they had. My father was among them now. And someday I would be too. But not yet. I still had work to do. That's how his little clerk became the admiral he never saw coming.